Star Wars Outlaws a game for you? Is it worth spending money on, or do you simply want to compare your experience so far with mine? I want to give you some no-nonsense feedback about my gameplay impressions after streaming and playing the game since early access started, and to show you the good, the bad and the ugly. Now, Outlaws is one of those games that has been debated on heavily before release, with people's emotions running high due to opposing opinions, and with early access ratings all over the place, it can be quite difficult to separate false praise from over-the-top criticism. So, just to avoid any confusion, this video is not being sponsored or promoted in any way by Ubisoft. And since this might not be the first video you've seen about Star Wars Outlaws, I've included chapters for your viewing convenience so you can skip back and forth between what you'd like to see. Let's start with a breakdown of the game. High level, the best way I can describe Outlaws is that it's an action game that aims to be accessible for a wide variety of players. There are three main elements that make up the game in general. Storytelling. Outlaws wants to tell you the story of Kayvaz and Nix about what life can be like as a young thief in the Star Wars universe, letting you experience her adventure through an almost cinematic playthrough. 2. Stealth tactics. As a scoundrel, you have to sneak your way through most encounters, letting you utilize a combination of melee takedowns, using your buddy Nix as a way to perform additional actions and solving small puzzles along the way.
Take him down, Nix.
And then 3. The look and feel of Star Wars. Mixing in familiar Star Wars elements with completely newly designed content backed up by the latest rendering technologies and audio support is meant to bring all of these elements together. Because storytelling is such a big part of the game's design, all of the gameplay elements have been tailored in such a way that they support it, that they complement it to keep you invested and immersed in that experience. However, depending on how much difficulty or quote-unquote realism you're looking for in a game, Outlaws could be a little on the light side for you. And this is why the game seems to be looking to be accessible for a wider audience, because it sacrifices having deeper mechanics in order to have a more easygoing flow. Once you've played for about an hour or two, you'll realize that Outlaws is heavily focused on stealth more than anything else, and that all activities in the game revolve around it. From the skills that you learn to how you acquire better standing with factions by running missions. That doesn't mean that there's no combat. It's present and you can try and blast your way through most situations, but it's clearly not how the game was designed. Let's say that running missions is making up about 75% of your activity in the game. Missions for the most part consist of having to infiltrate an area without being seen, looking for alternative routes to sneak past or bypass guards, or in what order you should neutralize them. So when you don't like to go through the process of figuring out what the best approach is to these missions, then there's a good chance that this game is not a good choice for you. Again, you can decide to just shoot anything that moves, but if you like more action-packed games, then you should know that there are main storyline missions that force you to take the stealth approach, otherwise the mission will fail and you cannot progress. This is one important side of the coin. The other side is in what way and by what degree you are challenged by the game in both stealth and combat gameplay. Now with stealth, you'll also notice that the entire process gets pretty repetitive after a while, in part due to how easy it is to Austin Powers your way through an entire complex of enemies without them noticing their colleagues are dropping left and right, and the lack of variety in which takedowns occur. The situations you come across usually contain 2 or 3 guards you have to take out. Now, some might have their back turned towards you at all times, some might be patrolling a small area over and over again, while others will just stand near a wall facing somewhat towards you. So it's then up to you to determine which one of these guards you take out first and prevent the others from being alerted. And that's pretty easy because they only have a small detection radius, I guess. And as a detail, depending on how much of a stickler you are for realism, you might have some problems with the way takedowns are done, because Kay will take down anyone with just 2 blows to the head. and that includes stormtroopers wearing armored helmets. But like I said, this way it keeps the story's happy flow going and has the smallest chance of distracting you from being able to focus on the story. Stealth and getting around are pretty much joined at the hip, and you will also be spending a lot of time crawling through vents, and in some mysterious way there's always an unlocked vent, unguarded vent nearby, scaling walls and sliding across ravines or climbing ropes. Now sometimes this parkouring can be somewhat frustrating when you're jumping up against rocks you can't seem to be able to climb, and that makes certain missions or areas still feel a bit linear. It can offer an enjoyable puzzle, especially in large areas where you can spend quite some time finding out the correct route to take, but this can also slow down the pace quite a bit, so this is something to be aware of when you're considering to buy the game. Just as a side note, when you're in these situations, when you're looking for the correct route to take, the game looks really good. The graphics are great and you have these great looking environments. So if that's the type of gameplay pace and type that you enjoy, then having a good looking environment really helps in that sense, because you can come across situations where you can just look around and think, oh, this is looking really cool. So that also is a part of living through that adventure whilst you're doing stealth or trying to find the correct route from A to B. Something to keep in mind. Once you've been detected or you simply start blasting away, enemies will respond and likely call in reinforcements to deal with you. But fights have a tendency to become pretty bland. Enemies don't really do anything else than acquire a line of sight and then just remain in that one spot and start shooting at you. They occasionally take cover, but don't seem to mind that much for their own safety. They don't try to flank you either, so it's just a matter of finding some cover and then take them out one by one. Now, since you only have one weapon and variety has to come through the different mods that you can install on your blaster, you yourself don't have that many tactics to employ. You can try to increase difficulty by adjusting some of the settings, but in general that only makes your health go down while enemy health goes up. It doesn't make enemies provide more of a tactical challenge. When dealing with larger groups of enemies, your blaster alone won't cut it, so the occasional grenade or borrowed weapon are often a better option because of their higher damage output. One detail about combat and stealth in general that caught my eye is that the enemies have a very narrow or small detection radius. This is in conflict at times with how believable the stealth mechanic is. You will often knock out an enemy with another one standing not that far away, sometimes even looking in your direction, and still they don't notice you knocking one of their colleagues to the ground. Again, this can be increased with settings, but at times it can poke a hole in that level of immersion because of how unlikely some scenarios are. But all in all, combat is more in service of keeping the story going instead of trying to be this semi-milsim type of Star Wars themed shooter. Now, it makes sense when you keep in mind that telling the story is the biggest goal in the game for you as a player to experience. Part of that story is the reputation system. Now, it's fun to see how much work has gone into crafting a true boatload of main and side quests, all geared towards impacting your standing with these factions. Now, for some, the idea of having to constantly make these decisions sounds tedious, but to others it might be the best thing ever in being really involved in Kay's journey throughout the story. So it's good to know that the system allows for enough freedom to approach it however you see fit. But like I said, your choices have consequences. Having good standing will give you access to new quests, new areas, vendors with better prices, but also special gear, so getting to the best possible standing level does pay off. Having bad standing takes all of that away, and factions will even send bounty hunters after you, which again makes sense from a narrative perspective. Now, the system overall has a direct influence on your gameplay, since having a bad standing will require you to take the stealth approach. So if you want to get through certain areas to complete missions, you have to sneak your way through. To make things easier, you can then try to first increase your standing so that you can just roam around these areas freely without them paying attention to you. Speaking of factions, you can expect to see 5 of them: the Pike Syndicate, the Hot Cartel, Crimson Dawn, the Ashiga Clan, and Zarek Bash. Technically, you also have the Empire, but they're more acting as the government or police instead of a faction part of the reputation system. Now, because each faction almost literally holds the key to certain areas of the maps, quests, and rewards in the game, This offers an incentive for multiple playthroughs if you want to see and do every piece of content, and there's a lot. Almost every broker or merchant affiliated with any of the factions will have some sort of intel available which will trigger another mission. You're also completely free in how you want to maintain relationships with all of the different factions. You're not required to be friends with any of them, and you can switch that up anytime you want. This puts you in full control of what experience you're getting access to. The story doesn't force you into a situation where you are purposely hardlocked out of that part of the game, and you always have a way to restore relationships. The Wanted system. It's something that you might be familiar with if you've ever played Grand Theft Auto, because it works in pretty much the same way. It works with tiers. Now, these small outposts will have an Imperial terminal, which also shows up on the map, and you can use these to reset your current wanted level to 0. It's a nice way to not let things escalate beyond any player's idea of fun or skill level, making the game less fun to play if it would have. Once you're at the highest level, you can reset the entire system back to 0 by seeking out a squad of Death Troopers, stealing a keycard and inputting it into the Imperial database terminal there at their location, so you can wipe your record, thus resetting the entire system. Now, in general, I feel that the Wanted system adds a good extra layer of action, but having a more severe consequence after getting arrested would have been interesting maybe, forcing you to break out of an Imperial prison or something similar. Then again, that would force players to go through that breakout scenario so many times it would not be a lot of fun after a while. It would be very repetitive. So resetting the system after defeating the Death Troopers seems like a nice middle ground where it lets you return to doing just, the missions to get back into the story. Even with the expert system, you can tell by now that every mechanic or gameplay action was designed with the storytelling as the foremost goal in mind, and here it's no different. From a narrative perspective, letting you play as an upcoming scoundrel is a built-in way to ensure even the way you acquire new skills and abilities is organically tied into that goal. Instead of a static skill tree and spending a skill point after gaining X amount of XP, in Outlaws this is done through the expert system. Now, experts are NPCs that can be found throughout the game world who will teach you new skills to use, from blaster actions to enabling you to install a turret on your ship. In order to gain access to a new ability, you have to perform a certain quest or gain a sort of achievement. You'll then often find yourself going out into the world to find certain items or to go do that quest. And I often found myself doing something else that I came across along the way. So making this part of storytelling instead of a menu is a great immersive experience. The game is more than capable of serving up some really good looking landscapes. Indoor locations look great too, with different lighting and reflections in pools of water, but in my opinion, the strongest feature here is that of showing you these awesome vistas. You can find different so-called treasure locations throughout the game, and at the end there's always a little cutscene with the vista, like a codec moment, and it never disappoints.
Let's see what we have here.
But all that said and done, the gameplay is the real deciding factor, and there's quite a lot to talk about. But, and this is the big elephant in the room as far as I'm concerned, there's a lot of people that have been experiencing a lot of technical issues ever since early access began. I myself have been experiencing a lot of crashes. Either my entire PC would reboot or my game would shut down. Little wobble there. Alright. Here we go again. Yeah, the drivers are up to date. I checked that. I checked that like 3-4 hours ago in preparing for the stream because I didn't want anything to go wrong. Haha. Wow, okay. Down. And to give you some numbers, the first night I streamed, I had 3 total crashes, so my PC completely shut down, and more than 15 crashes to desktop. Now I stopped counting after 15, and then I streamed the next night after, and I counted 14 crashes over the course of another 4.5 hours of streaming. Now obviously that's not cool, and even over the past few days when I was recording footage for this video, I would sometimes crash more than once every 5 minutes or so, give or take. Now, a quick shout out, by the way, to everyone who has been watching my stream and stuck around with me between crashing and starting up the stream and game again. Long story short, and this is my main reason at the moment why I would tell people, PC players in particular, to hold off for a bit until all of this has been resolved. Don't buy the game at this point if $70 is a lot of money to you, especially because spending even $70 on the standard version and letting get these kind of difficulties, these technical difficulties, get in the way of your playing experience, that's a big letdown, a big no for me. All right, all in all, when I leave out the crashing, which I categorize as a temporary setback, which should and could be resolved shortly after launch, I would give Star Wars Outlaws a solid 7.5, maybe even an 8.5 for Star Wars fans that really connect with the story. Now, I've spent a good amount of time over the past few days playing, around 20 hours, and overall it's really fun to play, especially the quests, because I always found myself wanting to know how the story would develop, and I feel that really is and has been the main focus point during development. But regardless of whether or not you're a fan, don't expect a game that is very skill demanding. The stealth tactics are the main focus in all of your activities, and if that's not you, then you might be disappointed in how much gunslinging outlaw stuff you actually get to do. And you have 5 planets available to you, and they're all large in map size, and there's plenty to discover, but a big part of the environment, certain buildings or wildlife in them, is still pretty much off limits. And the good thing here is that the fact that wilderness isn't empty, so it does give you the impression of a world with flora and fauna. It's just that you get to selectively interact with that world. Everything you see has been beautifully designed, and you can tell that an enormous amount of labor and love has gone into it. And some people might want to have had more interaction with the flora and fauna, seen possible, but not being able to take out random animals has been mentioned a lot by YouTubers. And I think that's a good example, however, of the influence of Disney being the ultimate owner of the IP and what rules apply to all of their products, including these games. Is that a woke agenda? I don't know. I'm not an expert on that, but I do know that even if you would allow for it, then the question becomes, where do you draw the line as a developer? Because it will require more work to allow for that kind of interaction, and then people will be asking to harvest from the creature next, asking for a resource system after that, and then it becomes this huge rabbit hole of features. Now, I think Massive defined a certain scope and had to take into account some rules laid out by Disney as a stakeholder, and this is what we got. Is that good or bad? The game really offers a fun and solid Star Wars experience, although maybe not as realistic or believable as some people had expected when this game was announced. Now, that's why I said in the beginning that I feel this game is all about the storytelling, with gameplay that is put together through solid yet safe mechanics. Now, on one hand, that can be a good thing, because the game doesn't give you a feeling that you don't know what's going on, that you're clueless on what to do next. It's not a difficult game to master. But on the other hand, that might mean that you quickly become bored with what is then perceived as repetitive and perhaps even shallow combat and stealth, particularly during parts of the game where you are forced into a stealth role and have no choice but to work your way through. As for the future, if you feel like this is a game you might enjoy, then I would cautiously say that it offers a lot of room for expansion, most likely through paid DLCs, to offset the cost versus the amount of work that would be required to make entirely new worlds and content. But before I wrap things up here, like the video if you've enjoyed it. It helps out the video and the channel. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a perfect time to do so, because besides Star Wars Outlaws, I will also be covering Space Marine 2 and a lot more fun sci-fi games. Now, this has been me sharing my thoughts on Outlaws. When you've already played it, do you agree with my review? What are your thoughts on the game? Let me know in a comment. I read all of them. For now, thanks for taking the time to watch. I really appreciate it, and I hope you found the video useful. Until we meet again, guys, have fun gaming and take care.